Good evening, historians. Initially, when I began my research on Woodrow Wilson and World War I, my focus was on the legitimacy of the Zimmermann telegram. I, like many others at the time of the emergence of the fateful telegram, questioned its authenticity. It seemed just too good to be true that at the very moment the Allies were reeling from the German onslaught on the Western Front, the British just so happened to intercept the very thing that would incite the Americans enough to join the war effort against the Germans and turn the tide in the war. It was an example of Deus Ex Machina in real life. However, with further research, I found out that German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann admitted to his authorship of the telegram, but reiterated that his intention for the correspondence with Mexico was only precautionary and was not intended to provoke the Americans to join the war. Poincarier's article, The Role of the Zimmermann Telegram in Spurring America's Entry into the First World War, expressed the same sentiment. He would also arrive at the logical conclusion that Wilson used the telegram to sway the opinion of the American public through its publishing. On March 1st, as a result of a planned leak by the Wilson administration, news of the German plot topped the headlines of major newspapers across America. Yee, in his article, wrote more from a technical perspective, i.e., the code-breaking marvel that was the Zimmermann telegram, than that of a political one. Still, he does not discount the important role that the Zimmermann telegram played in shaping the political outlook of Europe, and on an even grander scale, the world. Continuing with the theme of Wilson's diplomatic difficulties with Germany, Ross Kennedy, in his A Net of Intrigue and Selfish Rivalry, Woodrow Wilson and Power Politics During World War I, portrayed Wilson as an idealistic political novice who repeatedly bungled international affairs. In particular, regarding Wilson's views on Germany and the situation in Europe, Kennedy wrote, "Wilson saw the system of power politics as inherently unstable and as the fundamental cause of the war. But he simultaneously saw Germany as an aggressive, hostile state and German power specifically as a threat to the United States, which, seeing Germany specifically as a threat to America, implied that the United States should ally with others to contain Germany's power. In other words, that the United States should practice power politics itself to protect its national security." Wilson struggled during World War I to reconcile these two views, but was not successful. And in fact, his effort to do so had some damaging consequences. And this is the main gist of Kennedy's article. Wilson's continued missteps as the President of the United States during World War I had considerable lasting effects. His failures at Versailles ultimately led to German resentment, the rise of Hitler in World War II. His Wilsonian brand of diplomacy tainted American foreign relations thereafter until the modern day, and his dealings with the Bolshevik Revolution would pave the way for the Cold War with the Soviet Union later in the 20th century. It is with the connection between President Wilson and the Cold War where we pick up with our third and final article. In Woodrow Wilson and the Origins of the Cold War, 100 years later and still relevant, Eugene Trani and Donald Davis discuss Wilson's indecisiveness in dealing with foreign powers. The same indecisiveness that we saw from Wilson with Germany, as well as with the British and the French for that matter. For instance, Trani and Davis quip, Wilson then faced a major decision, whether or not to recognize the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and Lenin's communist government. Wilson's vacillation finally ended in a form of repudiation of the Bolsheviks, and he opted for non-recognition and a diplomatic quarantine, a quarantine having many of the ingredients of the later Cold War that emerged after World War II. This policy of quarantine would reemerge some 30 years later in President Truman's policy of containment. Reference-wise, Trani, Davis, and Yee did an excellent job referencing the most notable contributors when it comes to President Wilson in World War I research. Ray Stannard Baker, Arthur S. Link, George Kennan, Robert Lansing, Barbara Tuchman, and Thomas Bogart, to name a few. Ross Kennedy, who is typically one who finds his way into reference lists on the subject himself, included no cited works at all in his article. Thank you, and have a good evening.